Welcome to Talking Tactics. 2024 began with a bang, to be more precise with many bangs. While Russia has stepped up its attacks on Ukraine, launching over 500 missiles on various cities, including Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Pokrovsk in Donbass, Ukraine has successfully attacked targets in Belgorod and Crimea. And while in the very short term, the war will most likely continue as is, a deadly war of attrition, both Russia and Ukraine are working tirelessly in the background to tip the scales in their favor. Now, President Zelenskyy has named several strategic goals for 2024. Those include depriving Russia of air superiority and disrupting its offensive operations, targeting Crimea, in the best case isolating it from Russia, cutting off one of Moscow's main supply lines and bases of operation, increasing domestic arms production and weapons deliveries from abroad. So, the bottom line is, no negotiations as long as Russia doesn't cease and desist, with the military priority being defending skies, cities, and territory while building up a force strong enough to return Ukraine to its original borders. But how are these goals to be achieved? And what about the long term, 2025 and beyond? There are many possible outcomes and factors to be considered, but a lot depends on strategy of Ukraine, and especially that of its partners. That's what this episode is about. And while researching, we came across a discussion paper published by the Estonian Ministry of Defence titled Setting Transatlantic Defence Up for Success, a military strategy for Ukraine's victory and Russia's defeat. Now, while this 24-page paper is an analysis from an Estonian perspective, so it's subjective of course, we found it a fascinating read that gives a great overview and makes some pretty solid suggestions. So we wanted to break it down and introduce it to you while adding some of our own thoughts and comments. The paper pins down 5 aspects that are vital for both sides: the war of attrition, manpower, artillery, UAVs, and air defense. Now, we won't have time to go through everything, but before we dive into what we thought most vital, it's important to remind ourselves what Russia's strategy is. In Ukraine, Russia is pursuing the following main objectives: prolonging the conflict, expanding its occupied territory, exhausting Ukraine's sustainability, and destroying critical infrastructure, hoping that all this will lead to undermining resolve, so breaking the population's will to continue this fight. At the core of this lies the assumption that democracy as a whole, and the Ukrainian society in particular, lack the strength and resolve to sustain this level of conflict and will eventually crack. Now, in the long term, Russia is aiming to physically reshape the European landscape to its liking. But because of the massive resources Russia is pumping into Ukraine, it's quite clear that in the next couple of years, Moscow cannot engage in a direct conflict with NATO. But if it could, it would almost undoubtedly expand the war beyond Ukraine's borders. What's worrying about this is that Russia has expanded its defense industry at a scale unseen since the Soviet Union to wage this war against Ukraine. However, this is costing them a lot of money, around 1 trillion rubles, that's $10.2 billion per month in military expenses alone. Assessments suggest that hidden war-related expenditures could account for an extra 30%. Russia's military budget for 2023, after being doubled, makes up for a third of the entire budget. In 2024, 29.4% has been allocated for military expenses. To compare, the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, also known as the Ramstein Group, which is made up of all 31 member states of NATO and 23 other countries, boasts a combined defense budget 13 times greater than Russia's heavily inflated one, around 1.24 trillion euros in contrast to 0.09 in 2023. However, the Ramstein coalition's monthly military support to Ukraine averages at 5.3 billion euros, and that's including still undelivered and multi-year commitments. Also, with Iran and North Korea, as well as the illegal import of Western technology, Russia is continuously finding new ways to supply its war machine. Also, the sale of oil and gas out of the country continue despite sanctions. That means Ukraine's allies have the financial means to outpower Russia. But right now, Moscow is recalibrating its economy, with the war being its top priority. And if Russia manages to somehow prevail within the next 12 to 18 months, it would, and this is quoting the Estonian paper, validate its assumptions about our collective weakness that can militarily be challenged and exploited in the short term of up to 5 years. In conclusion, and this sentence we found really on point, it is clear that our strategy so far has not convinced the Russian regime in its cost-benefit calculation to bring them to the conclusion that they can only lose. And just as a reminder, in 2023, Russia has conquered more land in Ukraine than it has lost. So, moving on to the next aspect, manpower. Now, Russia in 2024, if allowed, can train around 130,000 troops every 6 months. In the 20 months following the start of the full-scale invasion, the EU, Great Britain, and the USA have trained only around 100,000 Ukrainian personnel, the cost for which was around 350 million euros, That's 3,500 per soldier. But those numbers will likely rise as training for fighter pilots, for example, are much more expensive. And while that is already an incredible achievement, there are a couple of issues. Training is often too short to adequately prepare soldiers for offensive operations. Then, what the soldiers are taught is often according to NATO doctrine, which has been known to lack a few of the specifics of the Ukrainian battlefield. No or little air support, the incredible amount of minefields, drones, the weather, Russian electronic warfare, to name just a few. Now, all those problems are quite well known, but one of the biggest difficulties, according to the Estonians, is that Ukraine cannot conduct training above company level in the country because of the obvious security risks. It's too big of an undertaking to go unnoticed by Russia. So, the aim should be to expand Ukrainian operations through the ability to execute brigade-level attacks. But that would require brigade-level training outside of Ukraine, which represents a huge logistical effort, however a necessary one. Artillery. It's a well-known fact that this is an artillery war, and to retain at least local fire superiority, Ukraine would need at least 200,000 shells a month. Meeting Ukraine's minimum demand during 2025 would therefore require a European effort of 140% increase over 2024. In addition to ammunition, a big difficulty is artillery barrels, which need to be replaced much sooner than anticipated due to their intense use. It is assessed that Ukraine will need 1,500 to 2,000 barrels per year, costing up to 900,000 euro apiece. Russia's total production and recovery of artillery ammunition reached 3.5 million in 2023. That's a more than threefold increase. In 2024, production and recovery will increase further and will likely reach up to 4.5 million units. Another problem is that Ukraine uses over 17 different artillery platforms. And while Russia has also quite a few, they are mostly produced in Russia, so streamlining both production, repair, and distribution is much easier. And this imbalance of resources in terms of artillery warfare can already clearly be seen on the battlefield. If we look at this chart published by the Wall Street Journal, we see that while Ukraine has had to reduce its amount of shells fired daily to around 2,000, Russia has been firing around 10,000 shells per day. UAVs. The demand for UAVs in this war is endless, but to put a number on it, approximately 2 are required per platoon of infantry, 3 per artillery battery, and 5 per battalion command post. The sophistication and requirements for UAVs increase with the development of enemy anti-drone capabilities. All drones have a limited lifespan, maybe only half a day. Long-range UAVs often have a lifespan of only up to 16 flight hours. Both Russia and Ukraine are heavily dependent upon Chinese DJI UAVs. That is problematic for obvious reasons. The Ukrainian drone industry is rapidly expanding. We've done a couple of videos on that, and we will do some more. But for NATO members to meet Ukraine's and their own needs, Europe must make a simple platoon UAV at scale. According to the Estonian paper, the aim should be to produce 5,000 per month, at a price of below 2,500 per unit. That's around 150 million euros per annum. In addition, European NATO members should collaborate to scale the production of fixed-wing UAVs with a range of beyond 80 kilometers that can transmit data in real time and reliably fly in an environment scattered with Russian electronic warfare. Russia has significantly expanded its drone production, both of night vision FPVs, which are causing massive damage on the battlefield, as well as various long-range strike systems. This includes stockpiling approximately 1,500 Shahed one-way attack UAVs now produced in Russia, alongside all types of missiles. In October 22, it was producing approximately 40 such strike systems a month. A year later, it's producing approximately 100. Production could reach 200 strike systems per month in 2024. That brings us to air defense. Russia's goal is to wear down Ukraine's air defenses, which rely on a constant supply of ammunition to sustain their effectiveness. Modern air systems are incredibly expensive. Patriot battery costs over $1 billion USD, PAC-3 missile over $4 million. But still, these are costs that have to be overcome. December 29th, 32 people died in Kyiv during missile attacks, and believe us when we say the capital is well protected. But still, it's not enough. Now, there is a lot missing that we didn't have the time to cover. F-16's long-range strike capabilities like the ATACMS, Scalp, and Taurus. The point is, a lot has to happen for both Ukraine and its allies to secure their strategic goals for 2024. Estonia, by the way, has vowed to commit 0.25% of its GDP annually to Ukraine for the next 4 years. According to this paper, if all the allies were to do so, it would provide Ukraine with approximately 120 billion euros, more than enough to implement the strategy, which is essentially an arms race, the Russian war machine already being in full swing. Anyway, thanks for watching Talking Tactics. Hit like and subscribe, and see you next week.